بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
أما بعد قال الله الحكيم في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولقد كتبنا في الزبور من بعد الذكر أن الأرض يرثها عبادي الصالحون صدق الله العلي العظيم.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Our series of discussions have gone into its final night. We started just a number of nights ago, has very quickly passed, as is the nature of life. What's left is what we've achieved. What's left is the impact that we make in these nights and in this life. When that time comes, that Malakul Maut comes to you, our belief is that Amir al-Mu'mineen will also come for his Shia at that point. The question is this: are you going to have your head up, or are you going to have your head down? Once you see the truth in front of you, there'll be many people who will say, if only we have just a bit more time, perhaps we can repent, perhaps we can do something better, perhaps we can become better people. The fact is that you're still alive. And like Hur alayhi salam, you have one more night. In this night, much change can come. What it requires, though, is a heart that's willing to change. These nights are the nights of mercy. These are the nights of Allah. These are those nights that we're meant to move closer to the ma'rifah of our Imam. These nights that you come to understand maybe some part of the haqaiq of Karbala, and by doing so, you elevate yourself and your generations to come. Just like in this world, everything is causal. The very same thing applies when it comes to family, when it comes to children. It's possible that one ancestor did such a deed that the next generation and the generation after feels the effect of that one good deed. For those people who originate from India, there was one alim who made a pious dua when he went to Najaf to the shrine of Amir al-Mu'mineen. He made the same dua when he went to Sayyid al-Shuhada. 2 generations of mujtahids came from his line. His dua was just that in every generation there should be one alim. That's one man, that's one dua. That 200 years later, you still find the effect of such a dua. So look, what you think is small isn't small. You think praying to God is a small thing because 50, 60 things that you asked for have not been accepted. It's because you've not understood how to ask. It's nevertheless on nights like these, where something happens. As we said, that in the way that there are 2 types of mystics, one is a salik ilallah, one is somebody who's majzoob. Dua is also like that. Sometimes, somehow, somewhere, with all of your wujud, when a person makes a sincere prayer, it is sufficient to change destiny. And at least once in your life you'll witness this. You'll see this with your own eyes and you'll hear it with your own ears. The ability that one person makes such a powerful dua that their destiny changes. Let me give you an example. There was a young man, and that young man bought his mother, who was extremely sick. She was about to die. So when there's no hope, what does a Shia do? Especially if you're living in Iraq. You go to Bab al-Hawaj, takes his mother, goes to the shrine of Abu al-Fadl Abbas. Perhaps it was a Thursday night. Takes his mother in. In those days there were no partitions. These partitions are very new. Before everything was open. Takes his mother, sits down, and begins to pray. One sheikh narrates, he says, look, I saw the state that his mother was in. So I got up and I said, son, I think you should go get some money together, prepare some kafan, prepare tomorrow for the funeral, prepare your mother for her final rites. I don't think she's going to survive. In his way, he was advising him. From the other perspective, the young man looks up and says, Sheikh, if I thought my mother was going to die, I wouldn't bring her here. I've come to Abu al-Fadl Abbas. I'm going to make this dua, and you're going to see that things are going to change. The sheikh said, wow. He said, I took a step back, I sat at the back. Now I didn't want to go home. I wanted to sit here all night to see what was going to happen, because I knew with the intention this guy came with, and the sincerity he came with, today, tonight, there's going to be a miracle. He said, I sat there, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited. And eventually you saw the frustration mounting and mounting and mounting on this young man's body, on his face. And eventually he gets up. And when he gets up, in those days they used to have horses, so he gets on his horse and he begins to ride out of Karbala. And as he begins to ride out of Karbala, a man comes, intercepts him and tells him, why don't you go back? Your mother's been cured. He says, how do you know that my mother's been cured? He says, come back and see for yourself. He says, where are you going? He says, I'm going to Najaf. Why are you going to Najaf? I'm going to complain to Amir al-Mu'mineen. He says, come back, see if your mother's not cured, I myself will take you to Najaf, to Amir al-Mu'mineen. This young man comes back. When he walks in, his mother was walking. She was completely fine. And so he turns around to this person and he says to him, look, you brought me this good news. I don't even know who you are. I can't see your face properly, but at least one thing, let me kiss your hands, let me kiss your feet. This man takes one step back, this young man moves forward again. He takes another step back. Eventually for the third time he says, look, I've got no arms to give you. For those people who felt that in their heart, you're in the right place. If on the night of Ashura, a person's heart doesn't melt, the best thing for them is istighfar. The best thing for them is istighfar. Because if it doesn't melt today, it's not going to melt. And look, secretly you've come here with a lot in your heart. And so no. Today, all of those things that you bought in your heart, the reason why you've been brought here today, and when I say here, the reason why you're watching today, the reason why you're scattered watching in your houses today, if you're sitting and watching, whichever majlis you're watching, be it this one, be it other ones, but the fact is this, the minute that you prepare your house for this majlis, for another majlis, and you sincerely sit down with your family to watch with all the adab and the respect that is required, know now is the time then that your dua is going to be answered. Above and beyond dua is this, just remember this, is to give condolences. You give condolences, don't worry about yourself. The one who you're giving condolences to will worry about your dua being accepted or not. You don't need to worry. You've come to the right place. You've come to a place where your master knows your heart. One alim once said, he said, look, It's almost shirk to ask from Allah dua. Had it not been for Allah Himself to say, "Udu'uni astajib lakum," you're insulting God by saying, "Give me something," when God already knows what your heart is. The one who is Kamil, who created you, who knows everything about you, to then go and ask for Him when He knows everything about you is insulting to God. He said, had it not been for the fact that Allah Himself says, "Udu'uni astajib lakum," it would have been shirk for you to go forward like that. Though Allah knows your heart, but Allah also loves it when you ask Him. So ask Him. If every door is closed, you know Allah's door is open. Look, what's going to happen after this? The day of Ashura is going to come. You're going to mourn. One last chance. And on that day, it doesn't befit for us to ask other than give condolences to Imam Hussein. Ashura is a day where everything stops. Your life stops only for one thing: the entire day's mourning. So technically this is the night which makes the difference. These are the nights that change you. This is the night that makes the difference. So now get into that mode so we can start by discussing and finishing what we started 9 days ago. Yesterday we said that the Imams have presented to us a particular methodology. The way of the Imams have always been passive. It's not been aggressive. From the 4th Imam onwards, they live with tyrants. What they taught us is this: how to survive in the face of tyrants. If, let's say, those traditions are correct, the years before the coming of the Mahdi alayhi salam, then you and I both know that there's going to be much trial and tribulation, much oppression, much killing, many diseases, much bloodshed. In this period of time, how does one survive? Here the Imam teaches you how to completely disappear into the shadows in such a way that at least you cultivate your own community and the people around you. And the way is very simple. After Karbala takes place, Imam Zain al-Abidin doesn't come forward to develop and to establish another army to go and fight Yazid. He doesn't do that. Why? Because Imam Hussein didn't fight. Imam Hussein protected himself. Had Yazid attacked Imam Zain al-Abidin again in Karbala, it would have been his haqq to protect himself. But in this space, what does he do? He does something far more miraculous than what Yazid could ever imagine. As Yazid's dynasty is collapsing, Imam Zain al-Abidin begins to establish a network that lasted until the Dhuhr of the Imam. This network developed upon certain things. One, the power of dua, supplication and prayers. If you open up the Sahifa of Imam Sajjad, you will see that those du'as cannot be repeated by anyone else. The beauty of those du'as and the power of those du'as is such. Firstly. Secondly is this. Take it a step further and see. What else does Imam do? Imam establishes two things. One, he establishes a system whereby the standard of living of every Shia and of all of those people who are impoverished or oppressed is raised. This is a message for us as well. Third thing Imam does is he educates, and we looked at it yesterday. Educates people. Remember, your biggest enemy is your own ignorance. Human beings' biggest enemies is not external, it's actually internal. And that's your ignorance. And the only way you can come over that is if you have the ability to gain knowledge and to remove that ignorance from yourself. So look, Imam establishes his jihad, and all of the Imams after the jihad is jihad ilmi, which means it's based on knowledge, which means to raise the intellectual and the spiritual standards of the people. And that is the only way, even when we talk about preparation for the Imam, that is the only possible way that you can prepare. Some people say we should do this, and materialism is not going to help. If that was the case 400 years ago, when they were preparing materially, after 400 years all of that is redundant and backward. What are you going to do? Make what? Do what? That's not the case. Prepare yourself. Prepare your heart. Purify your heart. Cleanse your heart. That's the way forward. What are you going to do? Build a building? What's going to happen in 200 years' time? It's going to crumble? What are you going to do? Stockpile oil? In 10 years' time, probably everything's going to become slightly more economical. more environmentally friendly. Technology changes. Technology changes, situations change, fitrah of insan doesn't change. To perfect the fitrah, to perfect your fitrah is so important that when that happens, then in any area you're prepared. In any given circumstance, and in any situation, you're prepared. And that requires for us to spiritually work on ourselves. And this is what the Imam does. But there's one more thing that the Imam does. Now go to the 5th Imam and 6th Imam and see. The worst dynasty actually wasn't the Banu Umayyah. What did the Banu Umayyah want to do? They wanted to exterminate Sayyid al-Shuhada and Ahlul Bayt. What did the Banu Abbas want to do? They made their revolution on the basis of the name of Sayyid al-Shuhada. But their entire aim was to exterminate the Mahdi alayhi salam. One empire, Imam Hussein. One empire, the 12th Imam. Everything was built to exterminating the 12th because they'd heard the hadith and it was famous that a 12th is going to come, who's going to wipe out the dhulm and jawr from the world. So what do they want to do? They want to destroy the Imam, and that's all it is. The reason why one Imam goes to Samara, why they put under house arrest, why this happened, why the poisoning, all of these things for one reason, they wanted to prevent the Mahdi from coming forward. What does that mean? What did the Imam do here? Imam knows this. Imam knows this. So what does the Imam here do? Imam develops an elaborate system. And that system was so underground that the Shia survived. How else did they survive? What else did the Imam? Charity. The best way that the Imam worked was charity. Help people. Help those people who are impoverished. Second thing was what? He developed people like Ali ibn Yaqtin. Who's Ali ibn Yaqtin? The minister for Harun. Harun Rashid had a minister. That minister was a Shia of the Imam. People always ask the question, are we allowed to go into politics? No government is more tyrannical than Harun Rashid's government. Ijazah is given, 6th Imam, 7th Imam. Ijazah is given to Ali ibn Yaqtin, go into politics. But Mawla, am I allowed to? Even they questioned. When the 8th Imam alayhi salam came into the governance that he did, people would say, you've sold out. They pointed fingers towards the Imam. Who are you? You're nothing. Pointed fingers at the Imam. And the Imam would say, Yusuf went freely. I've been forced to come into this position. Hey, Ali ibn Yaqtin is there. But what does the Imam say to him? They say, Imam prayed for Ali ibn Yaqtin every Hajj that he went to. The first person he prayed for, Ali ibn Yaqtin. So he asked Mawla, am I allowed to take the money? He says, take the money. No problem. Take the money from the tyrant. It's okay. Take it on one condition. What is that? Improve the standard of living of the people. If any of my gharib Shia come to you, any of them are in problems, pain, your responsibility is to save them. And if anyone comes, regardless of Shia or Sunni or Christian or atheist, anybody comes who's oppressed, you've got to help them. You've got to help make a better society. You've got to do your part. And Imam protected him. The famous stories are there. One day the Imam writes a letter, says, Ali ibn Yaqtin, from today onwards you do wudu like this, not like this. Hukum of the Imam comes. Remember one thing. When the hukum of the Imam comes, you follow that hukum. Even in the time of Sayyid al-Shuhada, many people didn't even know that. What did Ibn Abbas say to Sayyid al-Shuhada? He says, don't go to Iraq. Ahl Iraq have deceived your father. You're advising Imam of the time? You're advising Imam of the time? We respect all of those people from those days, Ibn Abbas and everyone. But the fact is, when you think about it, you think, Ma'rifah, everybody has different levels of Ma'rifah. Hey, Ali ibn Yaqtin says, he says, yes. Says, yes, yes. Starts doing it like this. Why? Somebody had gone to Harun Rashid and said, this guy's a covert Shia. He says, how are we going to find out? He says, watch how he does wudu. Says, fine. Wudu is something that if we see how he does it, you'll find out whether he's Shia or not. Imam had given him the hukum. They hide, he's doing wudu. He says, no, this guy's not a Shia. He's one of us. Next day, Imam again writes a letter. He says, now change back again. This is how it's done. Harun Rashid gives a shirt to Ali ibn Yaqtin. Ali ibn Yaqtin goes and presents it to the Imam. Somebody turns around to Harun and says, look, that shirt that was presented, he's given it to the Imam. Ask him, call him, see what happens. Imam expressed delivers it back. He says, Ali ibn Yaqtin, you keep this, you're going to need it. Knock on the door comes, where's the shirt? Here's the shirt. What does your Imam do? When you work in his way, the job of your Imam is he protects you. That's what the Imam is. Imam protects you. For every time you go and you see these hurdles come, remember, it's your religion. It's your responsibility. Imam is teaching something. Even when the situation is bad, do not stop engaging. Engage in the system. Engage, work with people. Why? Because if you have no representation, you have nothing to say tomorrow. What are you going to say to the people? Just standing outside shouting and protesting doesn't get you anywhere. Yes, it's good enough for people's anger to come out, but you don't change things like that. Had you changed them, 40 years later, 50 years later, you wouldn't be standing outside Hyde Park and screaming. That's not the way you do things. The most successful of our communities are those people who quietly do their work. Develop your friendship, develop your links, help your communities, and you're not just helping your community. Remember, a good Shia is a person who helps everyone. Develop. That's what's important. And Imam is teaching us that. The methodology of Imam is just that. He prepares people to go and work, integrate. And that's the most important thing. It requires people who work. Every person has their own responsibilities. Someone is there to protest, somebody is there to work, but you leave others to do their work. Remember one thing. You carry on with your work, don't raise a finger at somebody else's. You don't know what's behind that. You don't know which marja, which alim, who's given what, which instruction has been given. You can go and open your mouth as much as you don't know what's happening. Each individual carry on with their work. In this day and age, the most important thing is there needs to be engagement. Otherwise, as an isolated community, you can't get anywhere. If it wasn't for the case in the Imam's time, why is it today? We don't live in the time of the Abbasis. We're actually very lucky. We're in a very good position. You can do your azah, you can pray, you can fast, you've got people to help you if something, God forbid, happens. The first people to come and give you shelter are the Christian communities, are the Jewish communities, are the Hindu communities. We live in such an amazing time where people are so kind and gracious. Yes, now and again there may be some governments come in, some leaders come in. This is all part and parcel of politics. People are good people. One thing. Second thing is this. But let's say you do go into politics. Let's say you do gain a position. Now what's your responsibility? Let me tell you what happens. That Ali ibn Yaqtin, who the Imam prays for, one day he comes to Medina after doing the Hajj, goes to the house of the Imam. As he walks into the house of the Imam, what does the Imam do? Turns his face. Ali ibn Yaqtin now comes, he says, Mawla, what have I done wrong? Why have you turned your face from me? Begins to cry. Obviously, your Imam turns, what are you going to do? You're going to start crying? Begins to cry. He says, Ali ibn Yaqtin, in Baghdad, one of my Shi'as came, Abu Hashim. He was poor, you turned him away. Because of that, go. He says, Mawla, how can I redeem myself? He says, you go to him and ask forgiveness from him. Ali ibn Yaqtin says, how do I get there? Imam says, go at night time, there will be a camel next to Baqi. You get on that camel, you'll get to Kufa. He lives in Kufa, go to his house. Night time, saw the camel. Imam is Sahib-e-Wilaya. Steps later, he's in Kufa. Goes to Kufa, knocks on his door. Abu Hashim says, who is it? He says, Ali ibn Yaqtin. He says, what would Ali ibn Yaqtin, the minister, the prime minister of Harun, be doing here? He says, please open the door. It's Ali ibn Yaqtin. He opens the door. Ali ibn Yaqtin says, I want to ask you for forgiveness. Many months ago you came to me, I was unable to answer you, you knocked on my door, you went away discontent. He says, do you forgive me? He says, I forgive you. He says, that's not the way I want you to forgive me. I need to make sure that there's nothing in your heart. He says, listen, go, I forgive you. He says, no, on one condition. He says, what? He says, I'm going to put my face on the floor and I want you to put your foot on my face. He says, I can't do that. You're a Shia of Amir al-Mu'mineen. I can't put my foot on your face. He says, please, just do it. Ali ibn Yaqteen puts his head on the floor. Abu Hashim puts his feet on his head. After that then, back on the camel, back to Medina, comes to the Imam. Imam is smiling. He says, you've been redeemed. That's how you do it. Remember one thing. For any leader, and I know as these generations go on, people in the United States will take political positions. People in Canada will begin to take, in Scotland, in the UK. Just remember one thing. It's not a bad thing. Just remember, be humble. Have humility. When you're a servant of the people, just because others may be corrupt, it doesn't mean you lose the ethics of Ali Muhammad, what they've taught you. Where to serve. Service. Service becomes very important. So look, on that basis, we raised a topic yesterday. What was that? For whatever you do, remember whichever field of life you're from, whether you're a cleaner, whether you're a bus driver, whether you drive a taxi, whatever you do, accountant, doctor, remember one thing. The most important thing for any Shia is to refine their akhlaq. And this is where we stopped off yesterday. Remember, as I mentioned to you yesterday, there's a book called Manazil al-Sa'irin, right? It's one of the better books of suluk. And I'm going to take some examples from that. In Manazil, there's 100 stages of spiritual development that a person goes through. Now there's different from ma'amilat to akhlaq and so forth, different stages of your life. Before you can actually reach any maqam, your akhlaq has to be perfected. And the idea is this, that in your life, as you move towards Allah, there are different ahwalats that you go through, halats that you go through, hal that you go through, one state to another state to another state. One station, one maqam to another maqam to another maqam, until you reach Allah, eventually. And when I say Allah, you can never reach the dhats of Allah, but you reach at least the sifat and the asma of Allah. So there's a movement that takes place. To perfect your akhlaq requires you to have fatuwa. Why is fatuwa important? Fatuwa is translated as chivalry. And I want you to really bear with me for the next 5 minutes. If you can understand what I'm saying, it'll change your life. Why? Because the king of fatuwa is Amir al-Mu'mineen. Where does it say that? Battle of Uhud takes place. What does Jibreel say? La fatah illa Ali, la sayf illa dhul fikar. This la fatah, this is Amir al-Mu'mineen is sahib fatuwa. It's a maqam, it's a spiritual state. And when that spiritual state is there, your entire akhlaq becomes perfected. Now remember one thing, we call it the makarim al-akhlaq. It's not fadail al-akhlaq, for example. Fadail is virtue, but that virtue is based upon what? If you look at it and see, that virtue is based on, much of it is based on justice. For example, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But the makarim al-akhlaq is based on complete rahmah. I'll give you an example. The first stage of makarim al-akhlaq really is that when you hold no negativity to somebody else. Meaning what? Meaning you don't claim a right over somebody else. Meaning you don't demand from somebody else. Whereas fadail of akhlaq is this, that you can demand if it's your haqq. And over here, it doesn't mean that you let go of your haqq, but it means you let go of the attachment and you deal with people with mercy. So it's a completely different paradigm altogether. Fadail is what Musa taught, technically. Makaram is what Rasulullah taught. It's two different stages of human development. One is the stage of justice, which is your haqq. But remember, what do we say to Allah? Allah, don't judge us on your justice. None of us are going to pass. Judge us on your passion, your compassion. Therefore, you have to also embody that. That is the makarim al-akhlaq. The ability to embody that. And the most important thing within this that gels everything together, fatuwa. Sahib fatuwa is Amir al-Mu'mineen. What are the qualities? There are 3 stages, if I can break it down, of fatuwa. 1 stage for yourself. 1 stage when you meet others. 1 stage for Allah. When you meet Allah. 3 stages. Now remember, Chivalry. What is chivalry? Now technically your mind is saying, right, when you go into the battlefield, that person who's chivalrous is Sahiba Futuwa. Right? But remember, in the spiritual sense, you're a spiritual warrior. And your battle is the inner battle. So this is the first stage. The first stage is this. Your first stage to yourself is this. That you hold no grudges. First stage. Secondly, you don't argue with anyone. Second stage. And thirdly, you suspend judgment. If these three facets are within you, then you've given you the haqq that's due to you, to your nafs. What do I mean by argument? If you look at some of the greatest ulama, they never got involved in jadl. It wasn't about argument. Why? Because the purpose is intisar. Basically, you want to dominate somebody else. You've seen people, we've had a discussion with people that they want the last word. However you say 2 + 2 = 4, they're like, no, 5. And they want the last word. And however you say, listen, brother, look, 1, 2, 2. Say, no, 1, 2, 3. And they're not going to shift. What does Islam say? In fact, if you've got makarim al-akhlaq, leave it. Don't even get yourself involved in these arguments. Wherever you see arguments take place, run away from it. There's a difference between explaining something to somebody and getting involved in an argument. When you realize that this person is becoming stubborn, leave it. Why? Hidayah is from Allah. Your job is just to explain where you can see where Amr bil Ma'ruf has 10 different lists. You have to tick them off. Checklist, this. Then Amr bil Ma'ruf becomes wajib. Doesn't mean necessarily just because somebody's doing something, Amr bil Ma'ruf naturally becomes wajib on you. So look, and for that you can go to the Risala Amali of your marja and see that. I'm not going to go into detail in that. The only thing here I will say, which is the most important thing to say, is this. If ever you see an argument, back down. Why waste your energy? More than or not, it strengthens your own ego, and then you end up saying something that pushes you back from that focus. For the sake of Allah, quite fine, it doesn't make a difference. And train yourself. You know the best time to train yourself? In the month of Ramadan, when you're fasting and when you're driving, because that's when road rage happens. Best thing is this: whenever somebody sticks 2 fingers up at you, just smile and drive on. You know why? Because as many of the ulama have said, it's like if you retaliate, it's like hitting a stick. You're not hitting what's behind the stick. What's behind the stick actually is your own nafs. If a dog barks at you, you're not going to stop barking at the dog because you don't see it as an equal. If a child says something to you, you're not going to say anything, you don't require it, don't see it as an equal. But when somebody you see psychologically as an equal says something, straight away your ego becomes ready to go. So the first thing is this: don't quarrel, don't argue. Second, don't hold grudges. It eats you up. Grudges will destroy you. Don't hold it, let it go. Don't hold grudges. Thirdly, don't judge anyone. You know why? I don't know what the person is going through. Are you in his mind? Do you see his life? Do you know what he's going through? No. Do I have enough time to judge somebody? No. If I've got enough time, I'm wasting a lot of time. Only those people who have overcome you is who you think about a lot. So don't let anybody overcome you, just let it go. First stage. For yourself, now for the other. Your responsibility to the other is this. Here in Manazil it says, in Bab of Futuwa, it says that person who's become hard on you, trying to push you away, respect them. Love them. It doesn't say tolerate. Tolerate is something else. Tolerate means that you have to do it. No. Do it out of love because you want to do it. And that's the biggest change you can do within inside of yourself. How does one do that? Not only do you empathize with people, but you have to come from above to be able to do it. How do you become soft and loving to a person who's wronged you? It's the question. That doesn't mean that you leave yourself open to becoming wronged. It means that you show compassion to change that negativity. And it's not easy. You know, somebody a couple of days ago said, you're talking about developing love. And you're talking about crying for Sayyid al-Shuhada. But how can I remove negativity? It's not always easy. Yes, it's not always easy. The best way of removing negativity is to do khidmah, service. Selfless service. Why? Breaks the ego. You come into the mosque, right? Let's say we're here. Majlis finishes. You should be the one who takes food and gives it to people. You should be the one who takes water and gives it to people. You should be the one who helps. This service, this khidmah, is enough to break the idols inside of you. Look, I've seen successful people doing this. I remember many years ago, it was the month of Ramadan, I was much younger. In my local mosque, we went to eat, and there was a very senior member of the community, and he was served food. He came to one person, this person grabbed the rice and chucked it. He says, I don't want this. I remember that gentleman, a successful gentleman, went into the toilet, he was crying. And when I went there, he says, look, today I'm khadim of Hussein. If this had been outside, I would have taken care of this guy. But because I'm serving Imam Hussein, I can't even reply to this guy. All I can do is cry. I feel oppressed. And at that moment, somebody advised him. They said, look, the one you're serving is the one who's going to take care of you. The slave shouldn't feel anything. Let the master feel everything. We'll see what happens then. And Allah raised him. Maqam higher, success higher. This is what akhlaq does. So look, generally what I'm talking to you now would take a week to cover. If we were sitting down with our teachers, this entire bab takes a week. And that's only the part of the nafs, let alone others. I'm only summarizing this for you. I'm not here to give a Hausa lesson on manazil and the bab of futuwa. Therefore, I'll leave the section on God, because that section is complex. What I want to finish, a final thing is this. See, when it comes to akhlaq, right? On the very first day we said something. That was this. There are 5 things. There are 5 things which are important. That if a person has that, believer or no believer, whoever they are, however they are, on the day of judgment, hell becomes haram on them, whatever they do. 5 things. Remember we said a person who's ghayur has ghayra. A person who's courageous. And if you're courageous, you're sahib fatuwa. Right? There's 3 more left. One of them to be truthful. And as they say, a Shia is not a person who lies, so one has to be truthful. But there's one point I want to raise. And that is a person who has good akhlaq. What does good akhlaq mean here? Good akhlaq also means, good akhlaq is a state of being, by the way. It doesn't mean you're false. Just smiling at someone, giving your hand to somebody is not akhlaq. Akhlaq is when you empathize with somebody. But from the bab of good akhlaq, makarim al-akhlaq, is to talk nicely. To be polite. And that's something that we forget. Imam alayhi salam says, I was looking at the hadith today. Imam alayhi salam says that a person who's polite, sweet of tongue, not in the negative sense, but in the positive sense, his life is increased, his rizq is increased, his izzah in the family increases. Respect, meaning his respect in the family increases. His respect from around the people around him, the love for him increases. That is a person who can control their tongue. Why is that important? Let me give you a story. Final story, look, our time is flying by. Ayatollah Burujurdi, who was Marja A'la, right? So before Ayatollah Muhsin Hakim was Marja A'la, Ayatollah Burujurdi was. You know, today if 80% of the world follows Ayatollah Sistani, prior to him, when Ayatollah Khouy passed away, 90+% followed him. But when it was the likes of Ayatollah Hakim, then 99% of the world followed him, and the same way with Ayatollah Burujurdi. Ayatollah Burujurdi was once sitting in his class. Now these are people who have reached a level, so I wouldn't say you do this, but I'm just giving you an example of what Ayatollah Burujurdi did. Sitting in the class, one day one of his students questions him. If you ever go to Bath al-Kharaj, you'll see that the marja is sitting there and you get an opportunity to ask, and you debate with the marja about a fiqh issue, and the marja debates with you, and you can see this happening, right? And sometimes, obviously, you get people like me who may not understand, so I over-debate, right? Thinking, well, I'm sitting in Bath al-Kharaj now, I've come to a level, and when you're young and you've got a lot of, as they say, hot blood, You're thinking to yourself, I can debate with the marja. And those old guys sitting there are like, son, just calm down. Give it 10 years and then you'll see where you're at. But anyway, he's debating with the marja. Ayatollah Burujurdi is answering. And he's answering and eventually gets to a stage, he says, sit down. Be quiet, you don't know what you're talking about. So I told him off basically. This guy, shut up, obviously, what are you going to do? The marja tells you off. He went quiet. Ayatollah Burujurdi got off the mimbar. He started to cry. That night he couldn't sleep. And he says to one of the people, he says, look, can you find this chap? He said, look, these are the nights of Muharram. He's probably gone to a majlis. If you can get to his house at Fajr time, then speak to him. Ayatollah Burujurdi at Fajr time goes to this student's house. Knocks on the door, the student comes out, he's like, oh my God, Ayatollah Burujurdi is at my house. He says, oh, you should have told me, I would have come to you. He says, no, this requires me to come to you. He says, can you forgive me for what happened yesterday? You have to think, what happened yesterday? He goes, oh, please, you don't need to ask forgiveness from me. I was being stupid, I was being cocky, I was asking you questions. You don't ask forgiveness. He says, no. He says, I made a promise to myself, if ever I lost my temper, I would fast for the whole year. I'm going to fast for the whole year, but I want you to forgive me, because maybe I must have hurt you. And if I hurt you, I'm out of the wilayah. He says, I swear you've done nothing wrong, nothing to forgive. He says, just say you forgive me. He says, look, I forgive you anyway. I forgive you, but you've done nothing wrong, please. I'm not saying because you're the marja of the time, you're like our father, you've done nothing wrong. I was cocky, you put me in my place. Ayatollah Burujurdi was, no. I lost my temper a little bit. And for that, I seek your forgiveness. And he fasted for 1 year. When your leaders are like that, then you understand why they're marja a'la. Now, how many times a day do we lose our tempers? With our children, with our family members, God forbid with our parents. You see, do you think it's easy? It can be very easy if you want it to be. Condition is this. You've got to focus, you've got to work on yourself. Look, our time has come to an end. I wish we had more time, there's a lot more to say. Looking at the time going past, our time has come to an end. Allah give us all the tawfiq to truly cry for Imam Hussein and to truly give condolences. Look, the main reason why we gather here, and this, everything that you just heard before is all a supplement, is to maybe shed 2 tears for the sake of the Ahlul Bayt, to gladden the heart of Zahra alayhi salam. 2 things I'm going to say, and then after that, inshallah, Taboot of Ali Akbar was going to be lifted. Whenever I think of this tradition, it pains me. And that is this. Final wida of Ali Akbar. 3 widas. 1, when he goes to the tent of Imam Zain al-Abidin. As he goes there, the tradition says he begins to kiss the hands and the feet and the forehead of Imam Zain al-Abidin. Imam Zain al-Abidin opens his eyes and says, brother, what bala has befallen that you're doing this? Ali Akbar just replies, Baqiya Abuna, Ghariban, Faridan, Adshanan, Mazluma. Our father is alone, and he's oppressed, and he's thirsty. Second tent that he goes to, Goes to the tent of his aunt, Sayyidah Zainab. Ijaz is given from her, so he goes to the tent of his mother. You know, mothers out there, if your young son for the last time is coming and asking you for permission for death, what would you do? What would you say? Again, this mother is old. It's wajib for your mother and father both to give you permission before you go into the battlefield. What does his mother say? She says, son, I'm old now. I don't have any other children. I don't have anybody else to take care of me. Son, if you go, who am I going to live for? You know, as a parent, what do you want to see? You want your children to grow old, and if you have sons, the happiest day, ask any mother or father, is the day when that son gets married. You'll see that your mother and father are the happiest. If anybody is or anybody's not, your old father, your old mother is going to be so happy that day, the day when you get married. Now imagine if your son is taken from you and there's no progeny there. Have you ever seen, God forbid, that a son passes away but he has children? How that mother, that father grabs hold of those children? You'll never come to know. You know why? Because until you yourself don't become a parent, you don't know what a love is that a mother and father have for their children. They continue to look at their grandchildren in remembrance of their son. Now you may understand slightly why for Fatima Zahra alayhi salam, for her when she looked at Ali Akbar, for example, as it says in the tradition, she'd gone many years before that. Imam Hussein was very young. But you know, Zahra not separated from this world. Why Sakina meant a lot. You know what the tradition says? It says that when they got to Kufa, Imam's head fell from the spear and wouldn't go any further. At that moment, Imam Sajjad looks to his father's head and says, Father, my back can't take it anymore. Why don't you move forward? For a voice comes. Sajjad, my Sakina's fallen somewhere. I'm not going to move until you don't bring her back. Imam says to Sayyidah Zainab, Sakina's fallen somewhere. Imam's not going to move. Our father's not going to move. Tradition says, when Zainab looks into the distance, she sees a woman holding a young baby, holding a young girl. Not a baby, but a small girl. When she comes close, she realizes it's Sakina. The first thing she says is this. She says, O woman, you've done ihsan on the daughter of Hussein. And know that on the day of judgment, when my grandmother comes, I'm going to intercede for you on that day. This woman, while she's holding this 4-year-old girl, lifts her head up, says, Zainab, recognize me. I'm your mother. Imagine what would be going on the heart of Zahra. So the tradition says, it says that Ali Akbar knows that he needs to somehow convince his mother, so he just says one thing. He says, Mother, on the day of judgment, if my grandmother Zahra comes and she says, Layla, your son was alive, my son died, what are you going to do on that day? Layla looks up, she says, your father's maqam is higher, go into the battlefield, I won't say anything else. Final time, Imam Hussein now comes forward and he just says one thing. He says, son, when you were 7 years old, you started wearing an amama. Sayyidah Zainab tied it, your mother tied it. I was looking for a day to come where I would have an opportunity to tie it, perhaps on the day when you were getting married. Son, that time hasn't come in my life. Would you allow me to tie the amama over your head? Tradition says this. Young son puts both of his knees down. They say this old father gets the cloth to tie it. When Rasulullah was tying the amama on Amir al-Mu'mineen's head, He was reciting at the Battle of Badr, Nasrun min Allahi wa Fatun Qareeb. As Sayyid al-Shuhada begins to tie the Imam on the head of Ali Akbar, he begins to recite, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Ali Akbar goes into the battlefield. Look, I can't narrate all of it. Just so that you understand the ghurba of Ali Akbar. Understand the ghurba of Hussein. One Rahawi says, he says, I felt so sorry for Hussein. I wanted to cry. Why? As the horse accelerated, an old father tried to run after his son. As he started to run after his son, he would trip over and he would fall over. He would get up again, he would trip, he would fall again. Eventually a time came when Ali Akbar was hit, the only person in the Maqtal who doesn't call for his father. They say when Sayyid al-Shuhada got there, Ali Akbar was hiding something. He says, Ali Akbar, open your hands up. What is it? Says Ali Akbar was moving. Ali Akbar was moving like a fish out of water. He was moving because he was hurting. And so after that he says, look, show it to me. Ali Akbar removes his hands. What was it? A piece of spear was coming out. They say at that moment, Sayyid al-Shuhada puts one knee on the ground of Karbala and one knee on the chest of Ali Akbar. At that moment he grabs onto it. Some ulama have said, at that moment he was looking up and he was just saying, Ya Ali. He pulled it out. They say Ali Akbar begins to shake. At that moment, in a tradition, it says, as if there was an earthquake coming in Karbala. And at that moment, Imam Zain al-Aberdeen says, Aunt, what's happening in Karbala that you're finding it shake like this? She says, son, look yourself and see. And at that moment when he looked up, he saw an old father crawling with a son on his back. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Matam Hussain.